Welcome on in, golf fans. It's your boy Gsluke here with our DFS and betting preview for round 2 of the RSM Classic. Going to make sure you're ready for all of tomorrow's action. But first off, a look at the weather report, how that'll impact Friday's play, and then afterwards, a look at the DFS slate and the prop side of things over there on Underdog and Prize Picks to give you a good idea of how I'm attacking all my exposure for tomorrow. But first off, welcome on in wherever you guys are at, whether you're watching this on replay already here in the live stream. First off, hopefully you're having a fantastic Thursday. We've got some Thursday night football on later, golf out there tomorrow. It's a good time to be a sports fan. I see we already got Jeremy down there in the chat, who, by the way, it's one of my IRL friends down there. So first off, welcome on in, Jeremy. Nice to see you down there. Let's get after it out here for round 2. Before we truly dive on in, do want to mention our presenting sponsor, which of course are our friends over there at the Ship It Nation. So Ship It Nation, a great resource for all of your DFS needs, not just what we talk about here with golf and football, but they've also got you covered for NASCAR, UFC, basketball, hockey stuff, all those different sports that you can see on the graphic right there, all for a very reasonable, all-encompassing price. So if you haven't already checked them out, first off, what are you waiting for? One of the biggest sites out there, and in my opinion, the best all-encompassing website that you guys could go to. And if you use code Luke10, you will get a discount off any membership as well. So make sure to take advantage if you guys haven't already signed up over there. Let's go ahead and talk about this golf course. So in terms of the golf course averages for round 1, the Seaside course played a lot harder than Plantation, which has historically been the case when you have these windy conditions, but isn't always the case, whether that's pin locations, whether it's wind direction or intensity. Today and tomorrow are going to look very similar. So though we haven't brought up the weather forecast yet, spoiler alert, it looks pretty much like a carbon copy of what we had out there for Thursday. So these averages, like we had here from round 1, especially because the pins aren't going to change from round 1 to round 2, are going to be spot in line with what we likely see on Friday. So Seaside, that's the course that we have brought up here first, played to a 0.24 over par scoring average, and the Plantation course played 0.97 strokes under par. So quite the difference between the two golf courses. In fact, it was a 1.21 shot difference between Plantation and Seaside, which was very significant if you looked at this Showdown side of things. So with that in mind, with a similar sort of weather forecast, you'd be crazy not to want to play the guys on Plantation. It was over a stroke easier. And when you take a look at the breakdown in terms of birdies or better, you can also see the Plantation had more birdies. So down here at the bottom, it played to a 3.87 birdie average on that side of things, as opposed to just 3.22 per round over there on the Seaside course. So out for round 2, I wouldn't expect that to change very much. Maybe it's an even bigger difference than what you had compared to round 1. Maybe the difference ends up being a little bit smaller, but because Plantation is further inland, therefore a little bit more protected from some of those winds, and also because you have the 4 par 5s in play as opposed to just the 2 par 5s over there on the Seaside course, is likely why you saw that scoring difference. So I would not expect a lot of that to change day to day. When we look at the weather forecast here, and it looks like it's going to be pretty dreadful once again. So the temperatures in the high 40s to low 50s, your wind gusts in that 20 to 30 mile an hour range. And that's pretty much regardless of which model we look at. We go over here to NAM, looks pretty much the exact same. Meteo Blue, maybe slightly better, but it's 25 mile an hour wind gusts as opposed to 30 like you had on the first 2. The Icon model looks just like the NEM and HRRR. The GFS model, which by the way is one of the better ones that we have to work with, actually looks even worse than what you have with some of the other ones here. So pretty much no matter which way we dice this up for tomorrow, these guys are going to get absolutely killed. So I would try and go after the Plantation guys. They were at least playing under par. It is worth noting, though, that you had some Seaside guys still play well, despite that 1.2 shot advantage. In perspective, that makes McNeely's round even better than what it looks like on paper. Right? He was -8, which matched Thorbjornsen, which was a stroke or 2 better than guys like an Andrew Novak or Chandler Phillips. But if you account for shots gained metrics, he was actually well better than a shot better than Thorbjornsen. He was 2 shots, actually a little bit over 2 shots, better than an Andrew Novak, et cetera, down the board when you consider that he was playing the harder of the 2 golf courses. So the reason why I point this out is to show you that you'll still probably get a few guys from Seaside that are going to shoot something like -5, maybe even this -6, -8, like you saw from Maverick McNeely today. But what do you see outside of those few outliers? A whole lot of blue right here on this leaderboard. You've got these three. You've got this whole patch right here. You've got a few stragglers like a Kelly Craft, a Will Gordon down here. But of the guys that are T13 or better, I mean, it's just a wave of blue that we have here in this portion of the leaderboard. So that's where a lot of that bias came in. You can see it with the scoring averages. You can see it with the birdie averages like we went through before. And in your round 2 showdown lineups, I think it's an edge worth going after. So what you'll see in my player pool, what you'll see throughout some of the content here in this live stream, is that all the guys I'm taking in my showdown lineups are going to be from that side of tee time. So let me fix my hat. I saw I had a straggling hair hanging out right there. And we'll move into the showdown side of things now, talk through some of my top plays, and get a little bit of a grasp on what we're doing here for the next round. So we got Zach down there, says, thanks for the great content. Keep it up. I appreciate that, Zach. Thank you. Always a great job, Grand Slam. Thank you, Lee. And he said, Seamus killed you on some showdown lineups. Yeah, I didn't play any showdown today, so I can't say that I feel you on that, but hopefully it goes better for you this time. You didn't have our content for round 1, right? Going out there and playing Seamus. Maybe your luck will turn around now that you have the live stream to work with. So if you have any specific questions, brother, feel free to go ahead and let me know. But I really like this slate and the way that it sets up, because we've got a clear edge when it comes to taking one half of the field versus the other. Sometimes it's a wave difference. This time it's just one half of the field playing one golf course versus the other half playing the other. The things that we add on top of that to further generate EV are going to be playing game theory, making sure that we're getting different. We have leverage to the rest of the field. And what is a godsend, right? If we're going to be playing guys on the plantation course, that means that all of them were on Seaside on round number 1. And the added blessing of not only do they have the better course out there tomorrow, is we have the shots gained metrics out there from the Seaside course. So plantation doesn't have the lasers. So if the Seaside course was going to be the easier of the two, we'd be in the dark and all those plantation guys coming over to the Seaside. But because it's working out the other way around, where they're coming from the harder course Seaside, which has the shots gain metrics, not only are we taking guys that are going to be playing at least probably a stroke easier golf course, but we also have the shots gain metrics to try and find the best plays within that wave as well. So what you're going to see in my player pool here is a good mix of game theory, going after some bounce backs. Ludwig, maybe not super low owned, but definitely fits that bounce back component. And then some guys out there that just killed it with their shots gained tee to green. So that's going to be what we see for most cases in these highlighted plays. Anyone that you want my specific take on, that's how I'm going to evaluate the play, right? Are they a guy that you could use for leverage? If so, is there some sort of breadcrumb that they could turn it around? On the flip side, were they somebody who just went out there and just killed it with their shots gain metrics? If they're not too highly owned, I'll probably consider taking them out there in a few lineups. So as I mentioned, anyone specific, let me know, but we're going to go through these highlighted plays now. So first off, at the top end of the board, we got Ludwig Bear at 11,600. Outside of the price tag, which is steep at 11,006, everything else really checks out. He's got a little bit lower ownership than what you had in main slate. He was close to 30% in most of those GPPs. Now I've got him at closer to about 22% ownership, which is still high. He's even higher than some of the guys below him in that 10K range, but deservedly so. I mean, he's the best player in the field. People obviously recognized that and flocked to him out there in lineups this week, which I don't think was a mistake. Obviously, hindsight's 2020. You could say that the +3 score would make him a mistake. I wasn't somebody that was burned by him in main slate, but I do know in round 2 showdown that he's definitely got a bounce back performance within him. And what you'll also see with my projections, by the way, these projections on the screen are my own projections from my Patreon page. What you'll see if you have access to the Patreon projections is that the guys on the plantation course have a sizable bias compared to the guys playing there on the Seaside course. And what I mean by that is that I take their raw projections, project them for each golf course. And then on top of that, I boosted the guys playing on plantation because not only do they have the higher birdie percentage, but also over a stroke difference in terms of that scoring average. So you've got to account for that at some point. I did that out there in my Draftkings projections. So make sure whatever site you guys are using out there for Showdown has that accounted for out there in your projections, because if not, you might miss out on that edge that we just talked about between the two golf courses. And what I like about Ludwig is that he's won here before. I mean, he's shown us he's capable of going low, and his round to the plantation course last year in route to victory was absolutely nuclear low. So he's going to need that to make the cut. I would expect the cut line to probably be, I mean, -3, -4 is at least what my intuition would tell me. I do want to take a look at where Data Golf has it. So currently closer to like -2, -3 is where Data Golf has it. I guess partially going to come down to the weather conditions and, just how low that scoring average can get on plantation. But to make it to the cut line, he's looking at -5, maybe -6 if it plays easier than expected, which is spot in line with what we're looking for in our showdown lineups. We are looking for players to get to -5, -6, give us that ceiling round potential. And Ludwig is looking for that same exact thing. And the issue with taking guys towards the top end of the leaderboard, this is a little bit of an issue round 2, but especially a problem for like a round 4 showdown, is sometimes they don't have an incentive to be super aggressive. If they're already towards the top end of the leaderboard, they have a lot to lose by moving down. What you oftentimes see is them playing a little bit too safe. Round 2 showdown, you don't have to worry about that nearly as much, as there's still a lot of golf tournament left to go. But we know that Ludwig is not going to be feeling that effect. Starting at +3, the kind of guy who really only shows up to events to go out there and win at this point, is the perfect kind of bounce back candidate out there for a round 2 showdown. So the shots gained metrics aren't really the reason for getting to a Ludwig. I will give you guys a little bit of a peek into his metrics, though. He actually lost in all 4 stat categories, but his most significant categories in terms of loss came with his shots gained short game. So around the green, putter, we're both well into the negative, which partially could have been rust. I think there's a lot of guys that showed rust today. Brian Harman, guys that shot like even par, even -1, just didn't have their best stuff. After a day or 2 of practice, round 1, trying to get back some competitive reps, if they shake it off, it could be a super low round. I also like myself some Brian Harman. So as just talked about, he also looked a little bit rusty out there today, but he would be a true leverage option at about 13.5%. So I've got him at sub 15%, which is what I would classify as a leverage play up there in the 8K plus range. And he's here at 13.5%. And you've got a few guys around him, like a Ben Griffin he's not like double the ownership, but he's like 1.5 times ownership compared to somebody like Brian Harman. So if you're looking to get a little bit different towards this top end of the board, you don't have that many guys to do it with. I'd say you've got like Brian Harman here, maybe Denny McCarthy, you get a little bit different with. I would extend that to a JT Poston. Obviously, all of those guys are plantation course players. So if you're looking to try and get some leverage, all of them are well within play. But what you're getting with most of these guys are players that didn't have very sparkling round. Like you look at Denny's shots gained metrics, and the ball striking was mediocre at best. Brian Harman, a lot of the same. His ball striking was kind of all over the place. So you're not going to get the best plays on paper, but I think there's a good reason why they struggled. So kind of like Gobert, these are the kind of guys we haven't seen play a lot here in the fall. JT Poston, I know he won at the Shriners, but outside of that, he hardly has played here during this FedEx Cup fall. These kind of guys, it would be really natural for them not to have their best stuff early. And I think that if there's a spot to buy the dip, buy low, it's in terms of ownership, price tags up, right? All these guys are 9K plus. They're expensive. So that really hasn't dropped yet, but you are getting them in terms of their low ownership. So I think Brian Harman's a great example. And I'll just tell you right now, like JT Poston would be a great example of a leverage play as well. Perhaps one that is out there in my player pool. We also got a Matt Wallace here at about 10% ownership. So even par, it's not like he had the worst round in human history. In fact, even par was slightly better than the field average over there on Seaside. What I more so like about Matt Wallace, the long-term fit, loves him. He's actually top 10 in the field in terms of his shots gained over his last 24 rounds. But his DP World Tour stuff, which by the way is not included in his shots gained metrics, or where some of his best performances have come. He's had a few times where he's been in contention. I believe was close to even being in a playoff and winning an event over there on the DP World Tour. So at $9,000, I think he's had just as good, if not better form than a lot of the other guys priced around him. He's playing on the proper side of things over there on the plantation course and is relatively low owned at about 10%. So as we've already said, there's not a bunch of guys towards the top that you can use for some leverage. Matt Wallace, Brian Harman, JT Poston, are the few kind of guys that you can get to in that kind of role. And when you're playing Showdown, you want to make sure we're taking guys from the right side of tee times, in this case, from the right golf course between Plantation and Seaside. And then you also want to be playing that game theory aspect. And by taking lower owned options like a Harmon or a Matt Wallace, you're accomplishing both. You've got Plantation course players, and you're also getting guys at slightly lower ownership. You don't have to force that in at all 6 spots, but it is sure nice to have in your player pool. I also got a Luke Clanton here, who, by the way, if I had to give you guys like my favorite play on the slate, it's Luke Clanton, and it isn't even close. The kid was hitting some electric shots to like 5 to 10 feet all day. He also had a few shots where he looked like an absolute knucklehead, which is kind of his MO. He's known for the flashy stuff, maybe the best driver in all of golf, and that is non-exaggeration. He's as good a driver as Rory McIlroy. I mean, I've seen both in person before, so I'd be an authority on that. Luke Clanton is as straight as a Chris Kirk, a Brendan Todd off the tee, and he hits it as far as, I don't want to say Rory, he's probably got like 5 yards less than guys like Rory, but maybe a step back from that. So let me try and think of a good example. Max Grazerman distance, he's probably a little bit further than that. Let me actually look at the field. It'll give me a good idea of like a comparison. Like, he's longer than guys like a Davis Thompson, and he's accurate like a Brendan Todd. Now, this isn't me just singing the praises of Luke Clanton, but if you take a look at his actual performance per DraftKings event, he's got the highest average score of anyone that's in this field. He's played a few easy events, which contributes to that. But this guy's average finish is like 15th on the PGA Tour. He laps the field, and he's only $8,500, which I would argue is far too cheap. And even with what looked like his C game today, I mean, he had some shots that were horrendous. He showed some of the flashy stuff, which is why people are really excited about his potential going forward. But with a lot of shitty shots, and I mean, it was at least like 5-6 where it was like, what the hell is that? One of which, by the way, he hit out of a bunker, and he hit it like 60 yards to the left in the water. I believe that was at least a double bogey that he made on the scorecard, yet he still got it to -2, right? So that shows you that even when he's making mistakes, he's going out there and making a bunch of birdies, and he's still got some ownership here. So if he had shot like -5, -6, you'd have a 30% owned Clanton. And one thing to note about the ownership, guys, is that I account for any sort of wave edge when it comes to ownership. These guys that are playing the Plantation course are solid. I think it was 15% bias I gave towards the Plantation players. That means that they're, I think it was like 7.5% higher owned than they otherwise would have been. Whereas the guys playing Seaside course were 7.5% lower owned. Now, it's not like an actual percentage, right? They don't go from like 10 to 2.5%. It's done on a percentage basis, if you guys can follow what I'm saying. But guys like Luke Clanton, if he had played really well, it'd be 25-30% owned in this same kind of circumstance. So I'm going to buy the dip on Luke Clanton. I'm obviously a little bit biased as I have personal connection to him, but you guys will see. I mean, you take a look at the shots gained metrics from the places where we've had it, and you'll just drool a little bit when it comes to the stats. And which, speaking of, round 1, he had that horrendous shot out of the bunker, which, by the way, counts for approach. He lost like 2 strokes approach in that hole at least because of that one shot alone. He still gained 0.84 shots for the day. And then off the tee, I already told you he's maybe the best player in terms of off the tee in the world. Let's see where he was in this field. He was number 6 in the field when it came to shots gained off the tee. The only players that were better were Sam Stevens, Hayden Springer, Joe Highsmith, Carson Young, Doug Gim, and Michael Kim, who all of which are elite tier off the tee players. And my guess would be is that they didn't lay up as much as Luke Clanton did. So they had a better chance to go out there and gain shots. Give me Luke Clanton's off the tee game compared to all of those other players. He is probably, without that one hole, he gained like nearly 3 strokes on approach today. That's the kind of player that I want out there in my lineup. So you don't have to play him. Trust me, I'll take the lower ownership on him if I can. But yeah, if there's one guy I had to point out as my favorite play, and it's not even close, yeah, you heard him. It's Luke Clanton right there. It's not just because he has Luke the same name as me. There's a lot more to it, obviously. Matthew McCarty here, $8,000, is somebody I would classify as more of a leverage play that I really like for tomorrow. So he took a few weeks off after the win, which is to be expected for somebody of, first off, he's new to the tour. He locked up status for the next 2-3 years. So he didn't have to go out there and like battle for it during the fall swing. So why not go out there and take a few weeks off? And just like a few of the other guys, like Brian Harmon, a few of the other guys towards the top that really struggled their first round back. You saw it out there with their performance. So Matthew McCarty, I think that's a lot of what you saw out there Thursday. Friday, if he can have any sort of semblance of a bounce back, like he runs laps around the guys in this range. Like I know Patrick Rogers, he had really good shots gained ball striking stats. So I could kind of see playing him at slightly higher ownership. You have a few other guys here like Andrew Novak who have really good form. But like McCarty long term, I think is maybe the second or third best player in this field. For me, number one by far would be Ludwig. Number two is probably Luke Clanton, which you're probably like, what the fuck? Like Luke thinks he's actually the second best player in the field. Yes, I do. Right now, I'm not even saying in the future. Right now, he's the second best player in the field. And then number three is probably Matthew McCarty right now, which is crazy to say as well because he's so young, right? He's like 20 years old right now, but he's that talented. If you've seen him play, you could probably attest to that as well. So $8,000, only 10% ownership on the proper side of tee times, like that's going to be an automatic play for me. And I think really the only reason that he's a little bit cheaper and he's a little bit lower end than he should be is because he shot +1, which sure, not great, but that's 0.75 shots worse than the scoring average, 0.76 if we want to be exact compared to the scoring average on the Seaside course. Like sure, he had a slightly worse than average day. Like that happens to the best of them out there, right? Don't crucify a kid for going out there and having a bad start to an event, especially when he's on the right side of things out there for Friday. I'm also going to play some Sam Stevens. He's a player that in general is a high birdie percentage guy. He's $7,700. He's also only 4.3% owned, but he's the sort of player that at sub 5% ownership, you can really start to get over the field on. And you would include a Justin Lauer in that same argument. He's also at sub 5%. So if you went with either player here, you'd be getting pretty much instantly different to the rest of the field. I prefer Sam Stevens just because he played better than Justin Lauer. I obviously bet Justin Lauer this week. I took him in like 30% of my lineup. So you're pretty much kiss all of those goodbye there at +5. Unlike a Ludwig Gobert, who I could see shooting like -5 and making the cut. Justin Lauer having to get to -7. It's possible. I mean, he's on the right golf course, but to say I'm not counting on it would be an understatement. So I think Sam Stevens, just because we know he's playing a little bit better and he's got slightly more motivation to go out there and make the cut, is the player that I prefer out of the two. But either way you go about it, you're going to get super low ownership. So I like him. A Patrick Fishburne, by the way, he is an approach play. If you're taking a look at the shots gained metrics, in fact, he was number one in the field when it came to shots gained approach, gaining 3.52 shots gained approach in round one. So you give me that. The ownership's not crazy. I mean, he shot -3, which was very respectable, but I've still only got him at about 8.4%. I'll take him in 20-25% of lineups and get a solid amount of leverage to the rest of the field there. And even if he comes in higher owned than what I've got there, so maybe it is like 10 to 12%, especially in some of your higher dollar stuff where you have guys looking at shots gained metrics a little bit more often. Maybe he does get a little bit more steam because he was number one in shots gained approach. Even then, if I'm playing him in 25-30% of my lineups, I'm still going to have at least that 2x leverage there. So $7,500, somebody I'm actively looking to leverage. And we also got a Daniel Berger out there in lineups. His shots gained metrics aren't as impressive. This is more in the bounce back category. Like I was talking about before, you're really either looking for the guys that had pop rounds with their approach play and off the tee play, or second off guys that can just give you a bunch of leverage to the field, because we have to remind ourselves it's only been an 18-hole sample size. Golf is a 4-letter word for a reason. It's just chaos everywhere. Makes you want to swear when you're out there playing with your buddies, and you can't overreact to somebody just having an average day out there on Thursday. And even if you had a dreadful round, like what you had there with Justin Lauer, it's not inconceivable for him to turn it around. Now, for him to make the cut, -7, that's a different story. But for him to turn it around, shoot like -2, -3, I don't want to say that it's likely, but it's probably more likely than not out there on Friday. Daniel Berger, that same kind of boat. He's an elite tier player. He's cheaper than he should be at $7,300. And I've only got him at about 6.5% ownership. So the kind of guy that I'll get over the field on, you throw him in 20% of your lineups, and you're going to have like 3x leverage to the rest of the field right there, which personally is the kind of play I'm looking to get to. Clanton is an easy click for tomorrow. Love the approach. Thanks, Luke. Yeah, he's been playing awesome. Even round one, you saw that. And I don't think that's going to change. I think you're going to see even more of it to come. So I absolutely love it. Let's keep going a little bit further. So Jake Knapp here at $7,200. It's been a while since we've seen Jake Knapp. So nice to see him playing out there in the PGA Tour again. Has not played a lot this fall. Not really the kind of golf course that I like Jake Knapp at. So it's not really the course fit or anything. It's just that Jake Knapp is a baller. This is a player that is much, much better than the price tag. In fact, if I was ranking this field in terms of talent level right now, he'd be in the top 15 players in the field. So if we were looking at the pricing, that's up there around like $8,500. And Jake Knapp is only $7,200. So way cheaper than I think he should be. And it's partially because we haven't seen him. He hasn't been able to do anything that impressive. Towards the end of the year when he was playing in the playoffs, he didn't look that good against elite tier fields. But you know where Jake Knapp can stand out is against a field like this here during the fall swing. So at $7,200, only 2.4% ownership, he's the sort of guy that I'll throw in like 7 to maybe even 10 to 12% of lineups and get 3, sometimes even 4 times leverage, depending on where this ownership number comes in. Henrik Norlander, another guy I'm actively looking to leverage. A lot of it comes down to the shots gained that we had for round 1. So to give you an idea, Henrik gained 1.2 shots gained approach and 0.45 shots gained off the tee. So it was 1.66 shots gained ball striking round 1, which doesn't sound like anything crazy. And truth be told, it isn't crazy, but that is, I think, number like 13 or 14 in the field when it came to shots gained ball striking. So it's I don't know, it's not like +3, +4. Like +4, by the way, would be Patrick Rogers. He gained 4.2 shots gained ball striking in round 1. Patrick Fishburne, who we just talked about, 3.99 out there in round 1. I mean, those are your best performers of the entire field. But 1.66, that's pretty damn good when you look at the rest of the stats. So I'll definitely play some Norlander +1. You wouldn't think on paper that he actually played as well as he did. Just needs to make more putts out there for round 2. So low ownership, you can see him there at about 2.3%, is somebody that I'll get over the field on. I've also got some Bud Colley out there in lineups. So he's $6,900. He actually played pretty well out there. And just like a few of the other plays that we've talked about, his shots gained metrics really stand out. So off the tee, gained 0.87 shots round 1, which was top 15 of players in that category. And then on approach, gained 2.52 shots on approach. Tried to combine the two words there, I guess. Probably not advised out there when being a content creator like myself. But yeah, 2.5 shots gained approach is damn good stuff out there from Bud Colley. So he actually hit the ball a lot better than the scorecard would indicate. Now is going to be playing the easier golf course, and the ownership isn't there. Because he didn't have that putter, that short game kind of let him down a bit. He didn't go nuclear low like he could have. And I mean, if he had, he probably would have been like 5 to 10% owned, but now he's only 1.8% because he didn't capitalize. So continue that ball striking, be a little bit better with the short game, and we could see him going from -2 to something like -5 or -6. Luke List here at $6,700. This is a complete dart throw, and the kind of guys that you want to take complete dart throws on and not really use a lot of shots gained metrics with are guys that are high upside birdie makers like Luke List. He's a multiple time winner on the PGA Tour. He's a kind of guy that oftentimes outscores his actual placement position just because he's such an aggressive player. And if you look at the birdie or better stats the last like 5-6 years on tour, he's usually top 50 in the category, despite being like number 100 on the FedEx Cup list. So he's very inconsistent, but in a showdown format where we need guys to go nuclear low, Luke List hits that ceiling performance a lot more than a lot of his peers in the 6K range. So anytime we can get him down here at like, I don't know, the cutoff for me is like $6,900 or cheaper. You can see on this slate, he's down here at $6,700. So even better when it comes to the price tag. The other added caveat is that he has to be low owned, right? I won't take like a chalky Luke List down here in the 6K range, but he's $6,700, also only 1% owned. Like that's the sweet spot when it comes to playing him on Showdown. So playing the proper golf course. By the way, Plantation course has some drivable par 4s depending on wind direction. So we didn't see the shots gained today. We didn't have like the shot trails out there for Plantation. So it's hard to say like which holes were really drivable. I couldn't tell, at least from the shot trails, but Luke List has the length to take advantage of all of them, depending on that wind direction. So we'll have to see how that shapes out. And then the last player I want to point out here is going to be Roger Sloan, the whole way here at $6,400. And Roger Sloan played a lot better with his stats than I thought. And there were some people heading into this week that were actually on Roger Sloan for outright. So there's got to be something going on here. He's got good course history, I know, around the RSM Classic. But round one over there on Seaside, I know he shot +1. Doesn't look that great. He gained 1.25 shots gained approach. He gained a little bit with the putter. He lost nearly 2 strokes off the tee. So obviously that can't continue. But now he's on the easier of the 2 golf courses. He's essentially unowned. I've got him at about 0.8%. And I'm assuming that 0.8% is a lot going to be me, my Patreon members, and then people that are watching this live stream. So it's definitely going to get you different to the field, especially if you're trying to find guys on the plantation course. Ideally, we want guys on plantation that have good approach stats and that are low owned, and you get all 3 over there with Roger Sloan. So those are the sort of guys I would take dart throws towards the bottom end of the board. Luke List, just a long-term better player than the price tag. Roger Sloan, we actually saw some breadcrumbs out there round one to try to get to him for tomorrow. So hopefully it gives you an idea of the sort of pieces of exposure that I'm getting to. Now to bring up DraftKings real quick, I do want to at least talk through that kind of process here a little bit. And the main thing to say when you're building lineups for tomorrow is we already did a lot of the legwork, right? If you built your player pool properly, you took guys over there from the plantation course. The other thing to worry about was trying to find guys that had good shots gain metrics. If you do that, you have your player pool set. The only thing to worry about from that point on is to make sure your lineups aren't that chalky, right? Make sure that you have enough differentiation, enough leverage out there in your lineup so that you can, first off, not duplicate yourself out there in the large field GPP and give yourself an opportunity to move up those leaderboards when your players go out there and hit. So what that looks like is just making sure that you have at least 2-3 pivots out there in your lineup, if not even 3-4 pivots out there in the large field GBP. So up top, I'm going to go with Ludwig, who we're not even going to count as a pivot, even though he is lower owned than he probably should be. But he's got 22% ownership. So, I'm not going to call him a pivot at that sort of ownership. I will call Matt Wallace one, though. They're at about 10% ownership. I'm also going to throw Luke Clanton in here, but because he's 15% owned, just like in Aberg, I think he's lower owned than where he should be, but I'm not going to call him a pivot. Like, if anything, he's like average ownership. So you've got 2 guys that aren't pivots. You've got Matt Wallace here, who we would consider a pivot. Our last 3 spots here, we need at least 2 guys that we would consider a true pivot, if not 3, to round out this kind of lineup. So if you're entering like the big large field GPP, I would say that you want 3 guys that you would consider pivots. If you're in like a single entry, maybe just a smaller field contest, then maybe you only need 2 out here for your last few spots. So for the sake of this, I'm going to throw in a Luke List at $6,700. I'm also going to go up here and take a Bud Colley, who is also relatively low owned. So you've got 1% owned, maybe like 1.5% there on Luke List, a Bud Colley, who I've got at sub 5%. Your last min in here in the large field GPP, you really just want to make sure that you're not taking somebody who's like 10% plus owned. And of these guys at $7,300, I don't think any of them would qualify as that. So just to double check, I am going to bring up my projections on the other tab. I want to look at Echeverria's ownership because I think Echeverria is one of the best plays on the slate. So I've got Echeverria at about 7.1%. You could probably take Echeverria in this kind of lineup and get away with it in the large field GPP. Now, if this was like a single entry or one of those smaller field contests, as I mentioned, you could 100% play this kind of lineup and get away with it. Like, you're not going to duplicate yourself. You're going to have the kind of leverage that you need in like a sub 2,000 entry contest. For sure with this kind of combination. But even in the large field GPP, which I guess for round 2 Showdown would be like 4, maybe 5,000 entries, I have to double check the contests that are available. You might be able to get away with this because it's not like a 20 to 30,000 entry contest. So you've got at least 2 true pivots here. You could say that guys like Wallace, Echeverria would be pivots at their kind of ownership. And 2 guys that I wouldn't say are chalk, but you do have 22% on Aberg. You do have like 15% on Clinton. Gives you a pretty balanced lineup when it's all said and done. So really all we were worrying about that entire time, because we already selected our player pool rate. We already knew the kind of guys that we wanted to choose from. That was honestly the harder part of our process. The easy part is just making sure that we're not taking too much chalk together. And really the only kind of guys that you'd have to avoid just like going out there and only playing together, like McNeely, he's going to be on the right side of the golf course. Patrick Rogers, I believe, is also like plantation. Like if you're starting with a McNeely, like you maybe avoid guys like a Patrick Rogers. I forget who else off the top of my head is playing the right golf course. I know that Keith Mitchell's not, for example, but that's the kind of thing you want to avoid. Like I think these two in particular are the ones that really stand out. But like if you started with these two up top, you would really have to worry about your ownership for your last 3 or 4 spots. So, you can maybe take one of these two in a lineup. In fact, I'll just say that I have one of these two out there in my player pool. It's just that when I'm using them, you really got to think about using the other one out there as well. So that's what I'll say about the lineup construction. I'll see if there's any last second questions for DFS. If not, we're going to circle over there to the prop side of things and go through all things Underdog and Prize Picks, which speaking of, I do have to bring up Prize Picks real quick. I will circle back to chat. So if you guys have any DFS questions, now's the time to go and throw it down in live chat. And hopefully we have a board over here on these sites. They didn't have one posted before we went live, which I guess is natural as the round had ended only like an hour and a half before. But hopefully now that we're closer to about 2 hours out, we have something to work with. So what I'm doing here is I'm bringing up FanDuel, Caesars, I'm bringing up all those different sites that we have some stuff to compare to. It looks like a lot of them already have their stuff posted, which is good news for us getting a board in time over there on those other sites. So here's RSM, there's Draftkings, and then Caesars is the last one that I need to load here. And it says, look like the event is no longer available. Well, now it is, if I refresh the page. So let me bring it up for you guys and let's figure out what we're going to do on the prop side of things here. So where are we at? You trolled and went heavy on overs. And you said DraftKings is looking okay, though. Should have taken my advice not to go 30% Woodland. Yeah, 30% of any player down low is kind of crazy. So honestly, going overs on certain players definitely worked out round one. Course played like 2 shots harder, but yeah, I guess depending on who you took, Phil, you could have gone burned because there were guys shooting like -5, -6s. So we'll talk about the props here in a second. I think it's an interesting slate. Like there are guys that are going to go low tomorrow, I think, namely on the plantation course. And then you're going to see some real blow-up rounds too. Guys that just can't play in the wind that you see at the bottom of the leaderboard right now. So it's, I don't know. I think it's interesting. Should be target plantation, guys. Yeah, go back to the beginning of the live stream, bro. I do a full breakdown on why I think that's the right side of things. But for sure, yeah, I'm only going plantation for my exposure. How many pivot plays would I suggest for lineups? At least 2 or 3. 2 if you're like in a single entry, smaller field contest. 3 if you're in a GPP. And then 4 if you're playing like 2 mega chalky pieces. So if you went McNeely Rogers out there for round 2 showdown, like I want to pivot at all 4 spots to offset that kind of chalk. So you've got to kind of adjust your process based on the ownership that you're taking. But the general guidelines 2 or 3 in most lineups. You've got Dumont to start in your GPP lineup too. So there you go. Okay. That's not a bad start to have him there. What do you shoot -5 today? Any outrights that I like after today? So I don't know the board off the top of my head. So if you remind me, I'll take a look at that after we do props. I want to make sure I give the full, 15, 20 minutes over here to the prop side of things. But remind me and I'll look at that for you. And if there's anyone that I guess you have on your mind, you can run them by me. Maybe that's the better way to do it. So I do want to look at some of these averages before we look at Underdog and Prize Picks. So you can see at the top, we've got the 2 courses for the RSM, which is going to be our main focus when it comes to the prop perspective here. Seaside played significantly harder than Plantation. And with the wind forecast, maybe even looking a little bit worse out there for round 2, I would say that these kind of scoring averages over here on this tab, got lost there for a second, might even get a little bit harder than what you had for round 1. The pin locations are not going to change. That's what they do with this 2-course setup. They can't change the setup to be unfair versus one wave versus the other. So they'll move it like, I think it's like 1 pace. It'll be in a direction, by the way, that 1 pace that doesn't make the hole easier or harder. So like if it's tucked towards the left side of a green, they're not going to move it to the right towards the middle of the green. they're going to move it towards the back of the green where it's still whatever it is, like 3.5 paces from the left side, but it's just in a different spot. So the grass can actually grow back. So the course is essentially going to be a carbon copy of what you had for round one. I think just maybe a little bit harder when it comes to these scoring averages. So something like 0.2 to 0.4 over par over there on the Seaside course. Plantation course, anywhere from like 0.9 under par to maybe like 1.1 under par. And the reason why I add a little bit of air into the side that's easier is that the field strength and also some variance could lean to that as well. So in general, though, I think it's going to play pretty much the same. And if I had to give you guys like a birdie average for each course, I think it's going to be pretty much exactly what it was round one, something around 3.2 over there for the Seaside course. And then this Plantation course, something around like 3.85 over there for round two. So I wouldn't expect that much difference, which a lot of which comes down to setup, right? Course is going to be set up the exact same from day to day. And also this weather situation is pretty much the exact same that we had over there on Thursday. So I think this will be some valuable data, right? Oftentimes we have to look at pin locations. We have to look at weather and kind of adjust the averages to what we're expecting for the next round. That's not necessarily the case over here in round two, just because of the two course setup and also that very consistent weather forecast. Which, speaking of, I do have these sites up. So it does look like we have some props over here on PrizePicks. And then Underdog looks like, let me actually refresh it to see if they've posted their boards yet. Yeah, they've got some PGA stuff up yet. Let me see if they have any other golf stuff. So yeah, no DP World Tour stuff over there, unfortunately. We still have some DP World Tour stuff over here on PrizePicks. It's worth noting that they're in a weather delay on the DP World Tour because of flooding on the golf course. So, I mean, we'll kind of circle back on this later, but I think it's going to play easier because of all the rain that they're getting. But yeah, let's focus on the PGA side before we get over there. So 3.5 birdies for a few players. Okay, that kind of stands out to me. I know it played hard, right? Going back to scoring averages, right? It was less than 4 birdies over there for both courses. But you're talking about some of the top tier players. So let's go over here to PGA and see what we're working with. So 3.5 birdies. Wow, they've got a lot of guys here at 3.5. And it's the guys that are playing the Seaside course, which, by the way, Seaside, par 70, only 2 par 5s. So it is harder to make birdies there. But these are guys that are well better than the average. And the average was 3.22. So 3.5, like, I kind of get where they're coming from with these 3.5 projections, but I don't know if they've accounted for it enough. Like, for example, Keith Mitchell right here, over here at 3.5 birdies, he's literally the number 2 birdie maker on all the PGA Tour. The only player that makes more birdies per round than Keith Mitchell has made in 2024 is Scottie Scheffler at the top of that list. So to have him only 0.28 birdies higher than that average feels like a mistake, because if you take a look at his average compared to the PGA Tour average, he makes like 0.8, 0.9 birdies more per round. And this isn't even like your regular PGA Tour event. This is one of the weaker events on the PGA Tour schedule. So, you know, if he's gaining like 0.8, 0.9 birdies to the average PGA Tour player in this kind of field, he's gaining like a birdie per round. So that average was like 3.22. I do think conditions are going to be tough, but a guy like Keith Mitchell, I have well over a 4 birdie projection. So like, he would be an over for me. Like, I haven't even looked at the odds yet, but like, I mean, I just went through the reasoning with the projection, right? If I ran it through my numbers, it's going to give me something close to 4.2. That's pretty much a for sure over right there at 3.5. It's not like it's for sure going to hit, but it's a for sure piece of value that I want to mix in. A Ben Griffin, actually, speaking of, let me just bring up the PGA Tour site. We're just going to go through the birdie or better list and try and tick off some of those players if they're playing on Seaside. And I do think Plantation's going to play easier. But as you saw on that list before I brought it down, and I'll bring it back up here in a second, all of the guys on Plantation are at 4.5 birdies. They've got to make 5 birdies to go over. And just to go back to these stat averages that we were looking at before, it was only a 0.6 birdie difference, which I say only a 0.6 birdie difference, but the difference in projection was well over a birdie difference, right? So sorry, it isn't exactly birdie difference. So that's a bigger difference than the difference in actual birdie average. So what I'm trying to say there, right, is that for these guys to get to 5 birdies,
that's them gaining like 1.13 birdies to the field. For somebody like Keith Mitchell to get to 4 birdies and cover, that's him gaining just under 0.8 birdies to the field, right? In one case, you're asking them to go over a birdie gain to the field. In the other case, right here with Keith Mitchell, you're asking him to gain under a birdie to the field. So that's why I think if you're going to take some overs on players, then it's going to be easier to do it with some of these seaside players. Even though it is the slightly harder of the 2 golf courses, just because you're not asking them to do as much compared to the field. So we're going to throw Keith Mitchell in there. We could look at fades for strokes, which, by the way, we want to look for some guys that maybe struggled round 1 that we might want to target because they give up in round 2, which off the top of my head, I don't think a lot of these guys struggled. In fact, most of them played really well out there for the first day, at least. And for the most part, the ones that I can catch at least over here on the board. Hayden Springer, I guess he didn't have the best start, but he's there at 70.5, which is 1.5 under par. I don't know if that's my favorite line to go out there and fade. They've got some guys here at 70, which is essentially like 1 shots gained to the field. These birdie lines, just because like if they have somebody at Keith Mitchell up here at 3.5, they might have some real juicy players to take. So let's just go through this. So actually, Keith Mitchell dropped to number 3. He's just behind Harry Hall now when it comes to birdie or better percentage. Didn't mean to click on you there, Keith. My bad. So you've got Sam Burns there. So Keith is still number 1 in the field. There's Wesley Bryan. So, okay, Wesley, is he on the board? Which, by the way, I didn't know Wesley Bryan qualified for this stats. That must have just happened, by the way, him getting added to the board. He's number 5 in the field in birdie or better percentage. Did not know that. Okay, won't be fading him for birdie props going forward. Hit today with Keith Mitchell versus Wesley, but that was a lot closer than it should have been. Let's look at the rest of this. So Jacob Bridgman, does he have a line? I don't think he did, though, but let's look. They pretty much got all the guys playing seaside up, all the really good players at the very least. Let's see who the best one on the board would be, though. So I don't think they had a Joe Highsmith one up. I don't think he's on that side of things. You're obviously not going to have Xander, Wyndham. They're not playing this week. Lauer's playing, but Lauer had a terrible round 1. There's Hayden Springer. There's Carson Young, Sam Stevens. I don't think any of these guys posted over here on the DraftKings board. So, or I should say Prize Picks. But Keith Mitchell, yeah, he might be the main one that we have to choose from here. Off the top of my head, I know Keith Mitchell's got a decent birdie percentage. So maybe we look at that one. What's Davis Thompson at, by the way? So I'm just going to look at a couple guys in particular here. So yeah, let's look at Cole, who, by the way, you can tell I've looked at Eric Cole's birdie percentage a lot. There it is. Let's look at Thompson next. Davis Thompson's 38, so that's definitely a candidate. I'm going to look at Ben Griffin. I'm going to look at Siwoo Kim. I remember a lot of these, but they've been moving a lot recently. So Ben Griffin's 41. He's definitely a candidate too. Let's throw him in there. We'll look at Siwoo, Seamus, and Harris English. Siwoo, 61, Seamus, definitely no. And then Harris English, definitely a no. So yeah, these 3 are the main ones that are standing out. Let's look at Sepp Straka. I definitely want to look at Straka. Eric Cole's not out of reason. Like he was like number 70 or something like that. So yeah, let's look at Straka. Let's look at Spawn and Hughes. So here's Straka. Straka's going to be a no. Spawn is a maybe. And then let's look at Hughes. Hughes is a maybe, but out of all of those, I guess Spawn would have been the best in terms of their ranking. So in terms of the birdie or better leaderboard, these are your best birdie makers that you have playing the Seaside course. Now, just extrapolating their round 1 performance and trying to find guys that, can do it sustainably. We don't have the shots gained metrics on these guys, so we just have to do it based on their raw score. Keith Mitchell had like 8 birdies round 1. So obviously he played well, but that was on the easier of the 2 golf courses. Also a golf course where he had a lot of drivable par 4s. So, we got to give him some credit for that. That's good form heading into tomorrow, but I don't know if we can expect him to go out there and back it up quite as well as what we saw for today. Davis Thompson, on the other hand, he's more of a balanced player, kind of like him on that Seaside kind of course. A Ben Griffin, same thing. He's more that like positional kind of player. And then also JJ Spawn. So what I'm going to do to break this tie, I think I'm actually, believe this is the crazy thing, is I think I'm going to take Keith Mitchell out because my gut tells me that the Seaside course just doesn't set up nearly as well as Plantation does. And you've actually seen that with his track record. He has not had his best performance over there on Seaside, whereas these other three players I like a little bit more. So let's look at Davis Thompson. So Davis Thompson's course history, he's gone 53rd and then cut, and then 23rd. And by the way, he's from Sea Island. So he's from this golf course. Not the best track record. Ben Griffin, on the other hand, has gone T8, T29. So yeah, Ben Griffin definitely over Davis Thompson. And then let's look at JG Spawn. I actually don't know JG Spawn's form. So he's gone 13th at this course, 15th, 16th, 59th. So, okay, 59th isn't that great. And then only one missed cut, which was out there 5 years ago. So call me crazy, but I think I'm going to take out Keith Mitchell. I'm going to exclude guys that are maybe even better birdie makers and say that these two are probably the best props up because they fit a par 70 golf course a little bit better. You know, that par 72 with those drivable par fours, you want a guy that's got some brute strength off the tee. It's not like Ben Griffin, Gigi Spawn, by the way. It's not like they're terrible off the tee players. They're slightly above average, I would say, in both cases, but they're really good iron players and they're really good, and especially with their wedges, they're really good, and they're good putters over here on Bermuda grass. That's more so what translates to success at the Seaside course and why I slightly prefer them personally. So we're going to make this the slip for the stream. I'll have to enter this myself after we get off of here, but I'm assuming it's the same board over here on this side. So yeah, it looks like pretty much the same projections. If you're looking to do any fades, by the way, I think the way to do it might be on some of those 4.5 plantations. As I already mentioned, to get to 5, these kind of players, they have to gain over a birdie compared to the average for the field, which is, it's asking a lot more, at least comparatively, compared to the guys at 3.5. So if you could find one of these guys at 4.5, that's just kind of like a lower tier player. Fortunately for Prize Picks, I guess, they decided to limit your choices. So they really only have guys on here at 4.5 that you would consider top tier players. Like maybe though, like Adam Hadwin under on strokes. There could be some overs on strokes that you could take here too to like find some fades. Sorry, I meant like an under on birdies. That's what I meant over there for Hadwin. But there could be some overs on strokes that you could consider as well. So I know that we were looking at this a little bit before, and it didn't look like there were a ton of guys that you could take. But I'm sure if you do enough deep diving, you might be able to find a few players to take out there and fade, just because conditions, they look pretty tough once again out there for Friday. So I don't think it's like you can take anyone on the board and go out there and fade them. You're still going to get your fair share of ceiling rounds for sure. I mean, like McNeely, right on the course that played over par, right? He still shot -8. That's going to happen once again. I'm out there for tomorrow. But because the golf course is playing a solid 2.5 shots harder than what you had in 2023, there could be some value over here on fading some strokes props. In certain cases, right, there could be some undervalue over there as well. But I would say there's probably going to be more overvalue on these props than spots where you're going to find value for the under in most cases. So that's what I'll say about the board. Again, it's the exact same over here on Underdog. So if you want to play those two props I pointed out before over there, you can do that, of course. It might not be the worst idea, by the way, to try and take some positive stance plays like we were looking at, like this Griffin, the Spawn prop, and then mix it in with like an Adam Hadwin. So over here would give you the full 5x payout that they do for 3-mans. But if you did that over here, which by the way, is it going to let me look up birdies are better? Is it not? No, so it's not going to let me look up birdies are better. I guess we could just go ahead and do it by hand. By the way, Davis Thompson would not have been a terrible choice for that, but his course history wasn't quite up to the standards I was looking for. So let's take, where's Gigi Spawn? Let's find, okay, there he is. There's Gigi Spawn. And then where's Adam Hadwin? So if you did this over here in Underdog, the reason why I point this out is your payout would be 5.9x for taking these three. So I guess if you wanted to play these three together, you did want to find a fade over there in Plantation, you could go in this direction, but just know that this fade, like on Adam Hadwin, like maybe you could find a better player, I guess, to fade for strokes to go out there and mix in. So if you did that, for example, like this isn't one I would go ahead and endorse by any means, but if you could find a fade, it would be a 6x payout. So it's one of the rare few times. Usually I say play on Prize Picks because they're the ones posting the board first before Underdog goes out there and blatantly plagiarizes them about 5 minutes after Prize Picks posts. So usually I say play on Prize Picks because they're the ones actually coming up with the lines. But the payouts on these 3x, 3-leg slips kind of make the difference, especially when you're getting 6x as opposed to 5x over there on that side. So maybe play around with your slips over there in Underdog. Try and find a combination that you feel good with the payout. Well, that's all I've got over here for this live stream. Where we at? Looks like we're good. Alrighty, I'm going to hop on out of here. I'm going to get ready for the Steeler game. Heading over with a few buddies to watch it. It's going to be a good, hard-nosed divisional game. A little bit of snow potentially in the forecast. So hopefully it's a good night for out there for those Pittsburgh Steelers. And hopefully tomorrow goes well for our Underdog, Prize Picks, and of course our DraftKings lineups out there as well. So best of luck out there with whatever you guys are going with. Hopefully you guys have a solid Thursday night football slate as well. And let's go out there and continue it throughout the weekend. So keep an eye out on my Twitter/X for this round 3 and 4 live streams. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any of those live streams when we're going live on here. And maybe run good out there for our Friday exposure.